If you go on a date and there's absolutely no red flag, you haven't begun to scratch the surface. Everybody's got slightly worrying signs. If you want somebody completely red flag free, be on your own. As soon as you're involved with other people, you're involved with neuroses. You should say to somebody, how are you mad? Some people would go, there's nothing wrong with me at all. I'm not crazy at all. If they say that, just get up from the table and leave. We tend to search not for what is good, we tend to search for what's familiar. If being neglected, having to earn every little bit of affection someone gives you, if this is what you grew up on, you'll be strangely tolerant of it when it comes along in adult life. Part of the reason why we try to repeat bad things is to try and give them a different ending. Often what we do is we pick somebody who has a problem that we experienced in childhood. We're going out with an alcoholic and our parents were alcoholics. But this time we hope to try and wean the person off alcohol. Think of it like somebody who's been in a prison camp all their life and they've been denied access to food. Suddenly they're invited to a banquet. One of the responses you could get is indigestion, because the food, it's too rich. The nutrients cannot be absorbed. And I think that's a metaphor also for emotional nutrients. Sometimes if someone is incredibly sweet to us and generous and thoughtful, we think, what's wrong with you? And we may reject something not because we don't want it, but because it's unfamiliar.
Can you increase your tolerance? Hello everyone and welcome back to today's episode. We have a very special guest joining us today, Alain de Botton. He is one of the most influential philosophers of our time, best-selling author, and the founder of the School of Life, which has helped millions and millions of people. Alain, thank you so much for taking the time and being here today. I'm a huge fan of yours and the School of Life. You've helped me with so many things when I had relationship problems or just wanted to, do some self-discovery. I think your videos are so valuable. So I know this conversation is going to be extremely interesting and valuable for our listeners as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to know how, first and foremost, how you got into studying philosophy and psychology, human behavior.
I think that everybody who's alive has to become an expert in human behavior just to get through the day. Whether you call yourself a psychologist or a psychotherapist, or you're just someone who's getting by in life, there are so many issues where you're left thinking, why did someone do something? Why do I feel what I'm feeling, etc.? And this is the beginning of psychology. It's the beginning of self-awareness. We don't come with an operating manual. And yet, so each of us has to kind of find their way towards bits of knowledge that can guide them. And I know it does sound a little pessimistic to say, but I would say that it's problematic situations that teach us the most about our psychology and the psychology of others. So, put someone through a romantic breakup or the loss of a friend or a bereavement or something. These are moments when we really learn. It's very sad that we should be like this, that it's almost as though our brains are slightly sluggish and they won't kick into gear until there's a problem. And so we wait for a crisis before we start to really think about things.
Absolutely. And I really resonate with that because when I started my psychology channel, I basically started it talking about my own problems and then finding solutions for my own problems. And then when I wasn't experiencing any challenges for a period or life was going great, I felt like I didn't know what to post.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's that sort of dilemma that we all want to be happy, but happiness has a strange habit of, removing our sharper faculties. But, it's going to be a blessing for you and others in the field that problems do come along fairly reliably. We're mortal, others around us are mortal, love is a fickle and difficult emotion, etc. So we're never far from a crisis. I'd say every 15 minutes or so something happens that, will probably throw you in some way. So we don't need to worry that we're not going to be creative enough. But I think what you're saying is, some of the best thinking comes from personal problems. And, sometimes people say to me, how did you know this about me? And I always go, well, I don't know anything about you, but I know some things about me. And ultimately, if you use yourself as your own best data tool, you'll probably hit on general truths as well. So there's a strange way in which, we've got far more in common with others than we suppose, and it's often when we feel we're most alone with a topic that actually, ironically, we are hitting on something that is likely, almost statistically likely, to apply to lots and lots of other people. I mean, it is amazing how we feel constantly alone with problems, and we just have to tell ourselves, there are 8 billion people on the planet. It's just hugely unlikely that you're the only one who suffers from this. But the problem is that there's not much evidence in the vicinity of people suffering from a given problem. the way in which we meet each other in friendships, even in relationships, is in a remarkably edited form. We don't show the full complexities, and therefore we don't show the pain that, if we could admit to it, would allow other people to relate to us and to relate to themselves. So I think the function of art and culture, which I'd include a podcast on, is partly to widen the conversation and help us to introduce ourselves to ourselves and to be a little bit less strange to ourselves, because frequently we are sunk in shame and a sense of embarrassment as to who we are.
And why is that?
Because we don't have enough evidence that what is in me is also in you. And we don't have it because we are desperately afraid of sounding strange. We don't want to sound too weird. We don't want to frighten people. We don't want to intimidate. For often very good motives. It's not just that we're trying to show off or pretend that we are something we're not. We just genuinely don't want to make other people feel awkward.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I can very much relate to that. And it's in those moments when, I'm deeply ashamed about a part of me or something that's happening. And then I open up and, sometimes people can't relate, and then other times they do. And it just feels so good to know that someone else is going through the same pain. And it's almost healing in a way to know that you're not alone in this. So
that's right. I mean, we often look for solutions for problems, but many, many problems have no solutions. Death is the first one. And really all there is the consolation of company and of knowing that others have been here before. And that's no small consolation. It's a vast consolation. And yet often we deny that for ourselves. So we have in our societies, a few well-defined problems. If you're an alcoholic, you know where to go, an AA meeting, etc. But many, many other problems lack that kind of idea of a support group. And one way to look at friendship is that it's, a good friendship should be a sort of two-person support group where some of the most, difficult and weird experiences you go through can find a receptive audience, a kindly audience, and we can do that for them. They can do that for us. But, a good friend is a very hard thing to come by. It's not at all easy. Most of us are blessed if we have one or two good friends. Some of us have none. Many of us have none. It's not that we don't know anyone. It's that we don't have that person who qualifies really as a good friend, someone who's able to take the darker sides of us and also share the darker sides of themselves.
So what would you say makes a good friend?
I think that they are open to you and they listen to you without making you feel more alone. They make you feel less alone. And, it's very easy to go wrong here. I mean, if somebody calls you up and says, have you ever had that funny feeling when, and you go, honestly, not really. That could really immediately shame your audience. So one has to be extremely careful. I'm a trained psychotherapist, and one of the first things they teach you in psychotherapy school is how those very, very small moments in a dialogue with someone can throw them off from really opening up to you possibly forever. I mean, if a client in psychotherapy says, I've sometimes had these slightly strange sexual thoughts, and you go, oh, right. And that, oh, right, just sounds a little aggressive or whatever. That is enough to put someone off. They're not going to go a millimeter further. So we really, really have to be careful when, to create an opening for other people to reveal things. And, very often people are aching to tell us things, but they're not going to deliver those things unless they feel safe. And so if we want their company and their closeness, we will have to find a way of being rather honest with ourselves about why we might be putting them off. And very often, they say you can't go with someone else any deeper than you've gone with yourself. In other words, if you've opened certain doors in your mind, others can follow. If you've not, then they won't be able to follow. So one of the arts of good friendship is to make friends with as many parts of yourself as you can. It sounds rather paradoxical. We think it's all about the other person, but it's really about your relationship with yourself, which enables you to be a properly good friend.
Absolutely. I love that, and I really deeply resonate with that. I was having this conversation with someone the other day, actually, about how they have a difficulty holding difficult emotions for other people. And I asked them, but how do you feel about holding difficult emotions for yourself, holding space for yourself. And they said, well, I don't tend to do that. And it's like, well, I think that's why you have a difficulty.
Doing it for somebody else.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. You know, if you're very shocked by parts of yourself, you'll be very shocked by parts of others. If you're ashamed of your bits of yourself, you know, you may carry shame into a dialogue with other people. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how you know you found maybe an emotionally mature person. Is that the right term to use?
It could be. I think, the term emotional maturity is a fascinating term. It usefully separates it from maturity more broadly, because we know what it is to be financially mature, chronologically mature, etc. You know, passage of years, certain milestones, a job, a certain income, etc. We can track that, but it does feel as though there's this other thing that we're curious about with other people, and that doesn't really follow chronological age, and that is a kind of emotional age. We can meet people in their 80s who seem really in many ways to be stuck in adolescence, and we can see adolescents who are, seem to be like sages. So it really has very little to do with your chronological age. If we were starting a school for emotional maturity, we'd have classes where 5-year-olds sat next to 75-year-olds on the school bench. So we really, I think, have to be ready for rather unexpected disparities between someone's outward status, outward age, and where they are inside. And what do we mean by emotional maturity? All those fascinating things: ability to listen, as we were saying, ability to understand oneself, ability to communicate emotions as and when, an ability to sit with uncomfortable emotions, to receive uncomfortable information from others without flaring up, a capacity to apologize, to understand one's role in things, to know one's centers of pleasure and displeasure, to be able to communicate these to others in a timely way, not to insist necessarily on resolutions when these resolutions are not possible. On and on and on it goes. These are some of the ingredients that belong in a curriculum for emotional maturity.
That's so fascinating. And why is it that some 18-year-olds are incredibly emotionally mature and then some 80-year-olds aren't? Why is it that some people seem to be stuck in earlier stages of development?
I mean, it's fascinating. What we're saying is what helps people to think in this emotional way, to introspect. And I think, it's a combination of things. I think that you need a certain level of difficulty, or you could put it trauma, in order to get your mind going. But it has to be of a sort, it has to be accompanied by, a certain freedom from neurotic or psychotic elements that interrupt self-exploration. So, there are ways in which, I'm thinking of terribly difficult psychological emotions, psychological patterns like body dysmorphia or anorexia, for example, that are so intrusive. They really interrupt a person's capacity to reflect on their own experience. They dominate, they hog the mind. And, my heart goes out to people struggling with such things, because what they are is, afflictions that stop you being curious about yourself. You lose touch with your capacity to be interested in what might really be going on in you.
I love that. And if someone is uncomfortable with getting in touch with themselves and being curious about themselves, as you said, is there something practical that they can do to...
I think it's intriguing how there are some settings and some moments, even times of day, when it feels easier to introspect than others. Many people like a hot bath. There's something about being in hot water, not figurative hot water, but literal hot water, that does really help the mind to kind of loosen itself. A train journey is very often a good way. Being in a cafe, being outside. The way I see it is that sometimes if you're left completely alone with your thoughts, those thoughts are too overwhelming. They're too worrying. You're really worried about stumbling on something which is so awful that you can't deal with it. And so, you prefer to shut the door on the whole thing. If you're outside, if you're taking a walk, if you're in the bath, there's almost something else going on, and that will rescue you from getting stuck in a sort of loop of thoughts. Listening to music can be, very helpful. And look, let's not forget the other huge aid to thinking, which is other people. Somebody else who is curious about your inner experience really can help to tease you out of yourself. By being interested in you, they help you to be interested in yourself. So if somebody goes, if you say something and somebody goes, that really, it helps me to see things in a new way, that will give you encouragement, that warmth, that just a little nod, a warm nod to something you've said can give you encouragement to go down the next step and then the next step and the next step.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, I saw a video of yours the other day where you talk about a question that you could ask yourself to get to the root of who you are and what motivates you in life.
One of many, many questions which we can have. I mean, it is interesting, this business of questions that unlock things. In other words, you can be on your own thinking about things and you're not really getting anywhere, and then somebody asks you a question, or you think of a certain kind of question, and that question unlocks things. So, a very typical one which people ask themselves is, if I had nothing to lose, what would I really want to do? If something couldn't fail, what would I want to do? It just removes a layer of fear, or prompts us to remove imaginatively a layer of fear, and then you can get to something. Or, the classic one, what would you do if you only had a year to live? Or if you really have death in mind, where does your mind go? And so, the one you mentioned, another question that can unlock things. You can think, what wasn't I allowed to be as a child? What would I still want to be that I wasn't allowed to be as a child? And all of us have, as it were, shadow sides that were placed in shadow in childhood, and that it's the work of introspection, psychotherapy, etc., to guide us to those missing bits of ourselves, those bits that we had to orphan and exile in order to get through childhood. We can bring them back in and widen our sense of possibility. That's always what introspection and therapy is about, trying to widen a person's sense of what they could do next.
And what happens to a child who wasn't loved properly?
They go mad. I mean, very broadly, I think that all mental unwellness can be traced back ultimately to a form of deprivation, form of emotional deprivation. And it sounds strange because, why are we so susceptible to this? Why are we, these big creatures who are quite strong and have lots of faculties, etc., why are we so vulnerable to early childhood neglect? Well, all sorts of reasons, but we really are. And, those famous experiments of Romanian orphans, etc., and orphans who are given food and shelter but not love, and how disturbed they get. We see it in animals. If you buy a cat and in its early days you just leave it completely alone and whatever, it's not going to be well. If you buy a dog and you give it confusing orders, etc., it's not going to be well. So all the sort of mammals have this capacity to lose their minds if their relational structures don't have an element of predictability and generosity and kindness. And humans are no exception, but of course we are, as the apex predator, particularly vulnerable to this. And so this is why psychotherapy is, as it were, and as the cliche goes, all about your childhood. It's all about your childhood because it's in that long passage through to adolescence that you're learning about love and relationships and males and females and trust and self-belief, and all of these concepts are kind of forming in us. At the same time, I often use an analogy with language. We don't notice that we're learning a language. When we grow up, we don't notice I am learning English, and I might be learning English with a Leeds accent or English with a Cornish accent. You don't even know the accent you're learning from, but it's all seeping in while you're doing other stuff. A child doesn't need to sit down and learn grammar. They take it in. And I think we have an emotional grammar that we also take in our early years, made up of, as I say, emotional bits of language, as it were. And it sinks in, and it's very hard to change. And this is why sometimes people get very worried. They go to psychotherapy and they get very tired, and they say, I've paid this money, I went to see a therapist, and I'm not any better. And they've, done 4 sessions, and it's so frustrating. And, I feel for these people because I'm one of them, have been one of them in many ways. But, imagine you were trying to learn a new language and you tried 4 lessons. You wouldn't get that far if you're trying to learn Czech or trying to learn South Korean. You couldn't in that short space of time. And so the same is true of our emotional grammar. You can't shift it that quickly.
So, what would it look like for a child to be loved properly?
Such a good question. I think a loved child feels, in all sorts of ways, that they matter immensely to another person. They don't matter in a way that is overbearing. I mean, there's a way of mattering somebody. If somebody tells you, if you don't get good grades at school, I'll have to kill myself. That's not a very encouraging message. That's not necessarily love. So by mattering, I don't mean any kind of mattering. I mean a certain, the best form of mattering, which is somebody else is both very keen on us and also respects our autonomy, our needs. They're not going to impose their needs on us if they conflict with what they can make of our needs. So, someone who can let us exist. There are so-called loving parents who say, you must study English literature, or you have to become a vet, or you must join the armed forces or something. And, sometimes that's right. But if it's said so aggressively with no room to back out, it becomes almost a kind of insult to your own identity because you're not able to exist as you are. And so I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of this kind of so-called affection that masks really a sort of denial of your individuality. So true love respects your individuality, respects your autonomy, is warm and kind. It's also very attuned to you, possibly as a small person. It's somebody who understands that you are not an adult. You might not think like them, and it gives you a chance to grow up at your own pace. It doesn't force you to be brilliant or amazing. Can tolerate your less than perfect moments, your stumbling first attempts. Somebody who's on the side of your future self, and they don't need your present self to be entirely perfect. You see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people go through that where they're forced to grow up too quickly and they maybe skip these key stages of development.
I think it's really interesting, this idea of an emotional curriculum that has to be learned, and that if we don't learn certain bits of it, we might need to go back and have a lesson. And it's rather galling. I mean, because without anyone meaning to, sometimes you can find yourself in middle age and you didn't do that module on, I don't know, rebellion. And you may need to sort of tell your boss to go away and, break up your family. Or you might have missed the curriculum on, I don't know, learning to sacrifice yourself for the sake of somebody else, which is a kind of developmental stage as well. And you might feel very resentful of the demands placed on you by other people because you never had a chance to make your peace with, society and the needs of others. So, yeah, we've got this sort of, I think we're inbuilt almost to develop, to grow, to learn. And if we've missed a stage, well, we will, on the whole, just have to try and go back.
So what are those stages of development? You mentioned rebellion. What are some other key stages?
Some other key stages. I mean, look, in love, it's the ability, for example, to communicate clearly what you need to somebody else, even at the risk of losing them. To be able to say, I'm in a relationship with you. My job is not just to please you. My job is also to communicate who I am and see if you can understand me. Another step on the curriculum is, can you leave someone who is not good for you? It's a big lesson, and most people take a long, long time to learn it. Can I recognize when somebody is not necessarily matching my interests? Can I deal with the embarrassment, the shame, the fear of letting somebody down in a relationship in order to save myself? Very, very difficult lessons. Tons of them. We could go on, and we will.
Yeah, absolutely, we will. And I think it's when you're talking about love and letting people down or not being able to leave, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that mostly ties with anxious attachments. Why is it that some people become anxiously attached, whereas others become avoidantly attached?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I don't think the inability to leave someone is just about anxious attachment. I think it's more broadly about an inability to feel that you deserve to push somebody away, even if they've been very kind and very good to you, but that they don't really work for you in some way. And then often what people do when they can't do this is get the other person to do what they couldn't do. So they'll behave in ways which are unpleasant and short-tempered in the vain hope that the other one will lose their temper with them. Very unfair, very unfair. That's not mature. But you're asking me about the origins of attachment theory. I mean, attachment theory developed in the post-war period in the UK, based really on the study of children who were separated from their parents during the Blitz. A lot of studies of how the German bombers that came to England did less damage for England's children than the government at the time's decision to separate children from their parents and send the children off to the countryside in order to not be bombed. But what psychologists discovered, fortunately rather quickly, is that actually the children were being severely traumatized by their separation. They were physically safe, they were outside of London, outside of the reach of the German bombs, but they were facing a new threat, which was separation from their caregivers at a very young age. The huge incidents of antisocial behavior, bedwetting, various kinds of protest, and even also resignation, etc. And psychologists studied this. Incidentally, one of the great early victories of psychoanalysis was during this period when psychoanalysts wrote to the Ministry of Defense and got the government to pull back the children and bring them back to London. Because, as one psychologist famously put it, the damage to the nation's mental health will be far worse if children are en masse sent away than if a few children are very tragically killed by bombs. And so there was a real attempt to study what separation did. And it's from those early studies that attachment theory was born, and that we started to realize that when a bond between two people is ruptured, there are really two main ways of dealing with it. Either an anxious protest, I will not let go, I will kick the door, I will grab your coat and not allow you to leave. And then an avoidant protest, which is similarly also a protest but doesn't look like one. The way it manifests itself is that someone goes, I don't care about you. You care so much about someone that you don't allow yourself to feel that care, and your outward presentation is one of indifference. But it should be said, both in the anxious protest, angry behavior, and in the avoidant, sort of neglectful and indifferent behavior, the true vulnerability and love and yearning for another person is disguised behind a facade of something else. So both the anxious and the avoidant lover are afraid of saying something which really is very difficult, and it does take emotional security, perhaps more than maturity, which is to be able to say, I need you. I need you. To be able to say, I need you to another person. Very, very difficult indeed. And of course, tragically, it's another great insight of modern psychology, really, which is that if that process of trusting and needing someone went wrong in your early childhood, you will sadly be punished again in your adult relationships, where you will find yourself with an above average chance of suffering, either picking partners who can't love you, or staying too long around those who don't love you, or behaving in ways that are so counterproductive that they will actually drive truly good and kind people away from you.
So why, if we have an insecure attachment style, why do we go for people that are bad for us?
Well, we partly do this because it's very unfamiliar to us what someone who's good for us looks like. So, we tend to search not for what is good, we tend to search for what's familiar. And so if, being neglected, having to earn every little bit of affection someone gives you, having to wait endlessly to be released from your prison of loneliness, etc., if this is what you grew up on, you'll be strangely tolerant of it when it comes along in adult life. And all sorts of things come along in adult life. Don't get me wrong. When you're on the dating scene, for example, you will meet hundreds of people and they will suffer from all sorts of psychological disturbances. What separates a healthy from an unhealthy person is the speed with which you will detect what you've got on your hands. So somebody who's stricken by all sorts of psychological problems from childhood won't be able to recognize that they have a difficult person. And that's why you get these tragic stories of someone who's been abused as a child who will almost be unable and having a sort of beeline for somebody who also shows patterns of abusiveness. And the way in which it's explained is that in order to get through your childhood, you had to adapt yourself to the unthinkable, the awful, etc. And then what happens is that process of adaptation continues way, way after its sell-by date. So, you will still be pushing kind people away, even when it's really not a good idea. You will still be making jokes, even though when it's time to be serious, etc., because you're still doing what the child you worked out they had to do in order to get through to the next stage of life.
is there a way to heal this? To heal your anxious or avoidant attachment style?
Is there a way to heal anything? Is a big question. Patience is really important. This is not a fast process. It's going to be very, very slow. We need other people to help us. We need other people to understand our goals, to help us on our goals. We need a lot of introspection. We need probably to have really exhausted all other options. People do start to change when they've made so many mistakes and they just think, I'm going to try and do the right thing now.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about dating earlier. What do you think the best approach to dating is? What would it look like to date successfully?
First of all, realize that you are letting yourself into a very difficult process. It's not fun, it's not joyful, and it's not easy. Sometimes, especially people who have been married in a relationship for a long, long time, they go, oh, that sounds fun. You get to go out for dinner, go out for drinks, and you might have casual sex with a range of people. Wow, sounds fun. After 25 years of, a dutiful but not necessarily exciting marriage, it could sound wonderful. But I think people who do date will tend to say quite quickly that it's exhausting. And part of the reason why it's exhausting is that we've created this very bizarre world, especially in big urban centers, where everybody who is single is dating, and therefore no one is committing for very long. There's a constant look over your shoulder. There's a constant sense of replaceability. There's everyone lets everyone else down. At first, it's only a few people, and then because a few people have let a few people down, it sort of mushrooms. And so there's a sort of epidemic of flakiness and of unreliability and of indecision and all these, pretty challenging things. So we need to be generous towards people who are on the dating scene.
Mm-hmm. What could people who are dating do to kind of handle this whole dating scene better?
I mean, obviously, if you date someone who has the same feelings about that as you, that'd be a good thing. So, it'd be quite good also always to kind of say, well, to your possible partner, well, how have you been finding this, and what's been going on for you in this process? It helps to break the ice, and also, you can get to see yourself as part of a rather heroic subgroup of society that is doing this strangely unpleasant thing called dating, and that, as I say, deserves a lot of sympathy because there's so much disappointment, and there's also so much of a need to disappoint, and both are horrible. With every date, you'll probably either have to disappoint or be disappointed. I mean, or else it's marvelous, but it's marvelous a few times, not lots of times. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of sadness there, a lot of difficulty there, unrecognized. It sounds like a joke problem, but it's a serious problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that when I'm talking to, single friends or single clients or just single people in general, 99% of the times they're struggling. They're not enjoying it. I remember when I was single, my family would always tell me like, have fun, just relax, enjoy. And it's like, well, not really enjoying this.
Yeah. Because, let's remember, we are creatures who are hardwired for relationships, to relate closely to other people, not to change partners every 5 seconds. It's, it doesn't come that naturally to us. We're at our happiest when we have certain level of predictability around other people. Mm-hmm. So it really challenges us in certain basic fundamental ways.
Mm-hmm. And the advice you hear all the time is, love will find you when you're not looking for it. Do you think it's a good idea to look for love and put effort into dating, or not?
Look, I it's going to be a very personal view. My personal view is that you probably should. I don't know about you, but I've never sat at home and found love. It just, the door didn't open. Mm-hmm. And, for all the lovely ideas that you'll be on a train or in the library or in a bookshop, I mean, no one has ever come up to me and said, let's go out for a drink. It never happens, very rarely happens to men. It does happen to women, but it tends to be from often people that you don't really want to hear from, who might be rather frightening. So I think the idea of just letting the universe deliver your partner is beautiful and hopeful, but I don't think it works like that, sadly. I mean, imagine if you saying, I want to start a business, but I'm not going to go out and actually start the business. I'm going to wait for the business to find me. That'd be rather strange. I'm not going to write a book. I'm just going to wait until the book finds me. It's tough. I'm not sure it works like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think about it in terms of, like you're looking for a job, right? And you just hope the job will find you. And it
Mm.
doesn't work like that. You have to
Doesn't
go
work
on loads of interviews,
Exactly.
be disappointed, fail. It's kind of like a
Exactly.
numbers game as
Exactly.
well.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So I do think you need to do that. And I think, technology, for all its faults, I think these dating apps have been helpful because most people simply do not have the social networks to me. I mean, if you ask your friends, is there anyone that you can set me up with? I mean, most people will have 1.5 people. You can, and it's, estate agents were invented because most of us do not have friends who know a lot about empty houses. If you had to rely on your friends and say, look, do you know an empty apartment? You'd be homeless. I think some of the same holds true for dating. If you have to wait around just to serendipitously bump into somebody, you'll be waiting a long time. So probably, with all the necessary protections, you probably need to use technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's some dating mistakes that we commonly make?
Sure. I think people rush in too quickly. They decide that somebody's absolutely right or indeed absolutely wrong, sometimes a bit too quickly. They don't give situations a chance to, evolve. It's very sad that the dating rigmarole involves often a need to make up one's mind very quickly, so that, if you're on the 7th date, that's considered very, very strange to sort of not quite know after 7 dates. But 7 dates, 7 meetings, it's not that much, actually. I mean, for a really big commitment. So what tends to happen is that without knowing each other too well, people jump into bed, and then that starts to make things very complicated. And there's a lot of hurt where people will feel, so-and-so went to bed with me, but then they didn't want me. And partly that's not a personal failing on the part of the person involved, but it's really to do with the speed with which we're expected to make up our minds about other people in the dating process.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting topic about how soon should you get intimate with someone. What's your opinion on
My opinion. I mean, not for any sort of prudish reasons, just cautionary reasons. It's probably good to wait as long as you can. I think the reason for that is it's just if you need to pull away from somebody, it's that bit more hurtful if there's been physical contact. Whether you're doing the pulling away yourself or someone's pulling away from you, it's just there's a memory of a kind of extreme intimacy which can make it harder to feel cheerful about the end of something. So it has the chance to make you sadder than you need it to be. So I think best be careful. That said, physical connections are an important part of getting to know somebody. So, and we ignore that side of life at our peril. I think that sexual connection is very important. It's a very important part of a psychological connection with someone. And if we can't explore that, that's also a problem. The arranged marriage, you would never no sex before marriage, etc. There's a level of compatibility which can then never be explored.
Absolutely. And are there certain questions that you could ask on a date?
Well, at School of Life, we always have this jokey but very serious thing that you should say to somebody, how are you mad? So, towards dessert or whatever, if the date's been going well, you go, look, how are you a bit crazy? And some people would go, how do you mean? That's a really offensive question. That's so rude. There's nothing wrong with me at all. I'm not crazy at all. There's nothing mad about me at all. If they say that, just get up from the table without paying the bill and leave. I'm kidding. You should pay. But do get up. Because it's not a good sign. I think one of the things we really look for from people is not that they're perfect, not that they're trouble-free, but they know something about their problematic areas. And if somebody's able to go, look, I am a little bit difficult in this area. This is why. And I'm kind of thinking about it. And I'd love to work on it. That's very hopeful. It's very real. It's very unidealistic, but it's very plausible. And so I think asking people to describe themselves. Also saying to somebody, how are you difficult to be around? If somebody says, I'm not, again, they don't know themselves. You have to know, because everybody's difficult to be around. So if you're able to have a good answer to that question, and if you're able to ask that question, you might be saving yourself a lot of time.
There's definitely a green flag.
I'd say so.
Being able to have that introspection.
Yeah. Though, let's hear it for those flags. I mean, look, the thing about those flags is if you go on a date and there's absolutely no red flag, of any kind at all, you haven't even begun to scratch the surface. Everybody's got slightly worrying signs. And if you want somebody completely flag-free, red flag free, be on your own. Buy a teddy bear. As soon as you're involved with other people, you're involved with neuroses. Everybody's come through a complicated childhood. Everybody's trying to master demons. Everybody's trying to, balance up the competing needs of, work and freedom and status and love. And, all of these things are everybody's concern. And they mean that everybody's a little bit neurotic. And that's okay. We need degrees of neuroticism and degrees of health. You'll never get the full healthy package.
Mm-hmm. What most people do when they see a red flag is cut that person off.
And look, it depends what the red flag is. If somebody's bringing a dripping knife to the table, sure. But there are subtler things. Sometimes people are a little bit quiet on an early dinner date, and it's because they're nervous. And sometimes we misread that, and we think, oh, they're boring. Because in fact, they're not that boring. They're quite sweet. And sometimes, of course, we know from the way we are with colleagues and old friends, it can take a long, long time to really get to know someone and for love to develop. And so if you're on the lookout for these red flags a bit too assiduously, you can end up feeling that everybody's wrong. They're not necessarily that wrong. You just don't know them deeply enough not to take fright at certain things which are not ideal, but bearable, absolutely bearable.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we've become too idealistic as a culture?
Well, we can be a bit choosy, and I think that Instagram, for example, is full of psychotherapists and pseudo-psychotherapists who are a little bit too keen to tell us, what's wrong with people and, why so-and-so and this and that trait is absolutely impossible and we should run away. And often these lines are delivered by amazingly beautiful people of 22. And they're saying, if somebody, is 5 minutes late, just leave, just never talk to them again. And partly you want to say, look, many of us are not perfect human beings ourselves. Sometimes we're a bit late. Sometimes we've had to compromise in life. So we might want to be uncompromising with others, but we can't afford to be because we ourselves are such flawed creatures. So I think there can be a kind of intolerance associated with that language of psychological exploration of others' problems in the dating scene.
Absolutely. I think you're completely spot on this, because most of us forget that we're flawed as well, and someone will have to compromise for us as well.
Us, exactly. We're a mess. If anyone can have us. I mean, people who really know themselves are really charitable towards anyone who loves them, because they know that, they've got so much to be grateful for, given that they bring a lot of trouble. I mean, everybody who you're closely involved with kind of brings deep trouble into your life. Everybody ruins your life, as it were. But that's just normal. That's a consequence of getting to know someone very well and having your life meshed with theirs.
I think that's such an important message for people to internalize, and just so they have those realistic expectations.
Absolutely.
When it comes to relationships.
We've said it here.
But yeah, absolutely. And, again, I've seen one of your videos where you talk about steps to making someone fall in love. I don't know if you remember.
No, that sounds creepy. Maybe I did. Yeah, maybe I did.
What's your take on it now? Like, can you make someone fall in love with you?
I think really what we're talking about is not so much falling in love as get to know you and get to know the parts of you that would really benefit from the presence of someone else, if you're able to show, for example, your fears, things that are not so right for you. As long as you do it in a way that's safe and measured, etc., it can be very, very appealing to other people. So we often have this model that in order to get somebody to love us, we'll have to be exceptional and perfect and pure. And really often it's people's relationship to their flaws that draws us in. And I think a good relationship to your flaws is one where you can be self-aware but also have a bit of distance. You can be funny. You can be melancholy. You're not so up against them. So, someone who says things like, I'm often sad, but, I'll tend to cry on the bathroom floor listening to some good music, but then I'm normally up and about and, ready for brunch. That kind of helps to give you a sense like this person does have problems, but they're not without self-awareness or a sense of distance from those problems, which is very appealing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a psychological phenomenon as well called the pratfall effect.
Remind me of the pratfall effect.
So it's when someone becomes more likable when they show some sort of vulnerability.
Okay, that's lovely, yeah.
Because as long as they're competent overall, right?
Yeah, exactly. We don't want someone who's, going to have a pratfall every 5 seconds, but nor do we want, an iron man or woman who's never puts a foot wrong. It's somewhere in between.
Absolutely. And why is it that some people are really charismatic or magnetic and can make others, feel interesting, or that make others like them very easily?
Such a good question. I mean, again, I would say it has something to do with your relationship to yourself. If you think of what shyness is a sense, if you imagine somebody who really can't charm anyone because they're so shy, shyness is a sort of misapprehension about what other people are like. The shy person thinks everybody else knows what they're doing, is very impressive, is very sure, etc. And the reality, of course, is that most of us are in the dark about most things. And the non-shy person understands that about a stranger. So they meet a stranger, and rather than thinking this person is a godlike figure who works it all out, they'll think, they were probably this morning maybe quite tearful, maybe quite bored. They often don't know what they're up to. They're jealous of certain friends. They feel inadequate, etc. And this is not, I'm not saying this because I know you, as it were, or anyone. It's just, if you know human nature, like, that's just going to be on the table somewhere. So knowing that has the odd effect of sometimes relaxing you, because you think, I'm just with another human who's, a bit... There's a lovely quote from the 16th century French philosopher Montaigne, where he says, kings and philosophers shit, and so do ladies. And what he's meaning to say, I mean, we can translate it to sort of modern English, but kings and philosophers, high and mighty people, and ladies, very pure, etc., in his day. And he's saying they shit. And really what he means by that is not just a kind of, focusing on digestion. It's a broader metaphoric point about these people are human. We take off our armor and we're all human. And the shy person and the person who's blocked around being charming has forgotten that. And often warmth, what we call warmth, is a sort of, it's almost like you go over the barrier separating yourself from somebody else, and you guess that other people have got needs a bit like yours. So you go, oh, you must be a bit tired, or that chair must be hurting you a little bit. Or you imagine that another person is a bit like you. Mm-hmm. You take that leap of faith, and they've got all the small needs and fears, etc. And that gives your hospitality and your kind of the way you meet people a definitive warmth, I think. And that's what we call warm. Warm is, I know, I'm having a good guess about what's going on in you, and I'm coming to that need with some help, some kindly assistance. Mm-hmm. It could be a blanket. It could be a plate of potato chips. It could be, a chance to really offload about an ex-partner, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And one of the amazing benefits and good things about this podcast is that I get to meet a lot of, famous authors, best-selling people with millions of followers, which maybe I used to look up to as like put on a pedestal. And I think most of people are brilliant, but then it kind of makes me realize that they're all human,
exactly.
And they're not this godlike figure. Yeah. And as you said earlier,
sure,
like both ladies and lords, they,
Let's make a point about class. One of the benefits of growing up in a privileged environment is that you see people close up who are moving big bits of the world, and you see that they're very flawed and very human. Part of the problem of an underprivileged education is that often you don't meet people who have done big stuff, and therefore you fantasize that they have nothing in common with you. You could not possibly be that person because that person is so high and mighty, etc. It's very unlikely to be true. It's so basic, but it's such a wonderful insight when you can tell yourself, it doesn't matter what background I come from. I'm likely to have many of the qualities that actually will power me towards becoming one of those people who currently massively intimidate me. So there's really intimidation across class structures. And a good education system should help you past that, to be a bit more defiant, to go, well, I may not know any of the great and the good. I may not have got formal qualifications, but I see things. I can work things out. I've got some native ideas, and go for it.
That's such a brilliant insight. It reminds me of, I can't remember who it was, but it was this woman, it was a video of her saying she was in this boardroom with like the most successful, men, like controlling like the biggest companies. And she was there and she looked at them, she was like, you're doing this? And if you can do this, then I can do this as well.
Exactly. And it really is as simple as that often. And it's very puzzling. At the School of Life, we wrote a book on confidence, which is one of our big bestsellers. And what we try to do is not give people confidence by telling them they're marvelous and capable, etc. It's by expressing that they're a bit of an idiot. But the good news is everybody else is a bit of an idiot too. So your idiocy should never hold you back. It is no grounds for despair. The fact that, you look in the mirror and you think, oh, God, and that you do pratfalls and that you said something silly 10 years ago. So it's just, welcome to the human race.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this should not hold you back.
Mm-hmm.
Being a bit of an idiot should never hold you back from very complicated and very noble tasks.
Absolutely. I love that so much. Is this what gives people social anxiety as well? A lot of people feel like frozen or blocked, like in group settings or when it comes to talking to
a lot of
others.
social anxiety nowadays comes from the fact that we're so isolated from one another. We had COVID, and there's a whole generation that have grown up without those crucial years, 12, 13, 14, that COVID hit them at a certain stage and they missed out on a developmental stage of being with people. So that's been a real challenge. And then, we find it so easy to communicate on our phones that we find person-to-person communication really hard. It is more challenging. You're there with your whole body. You can't run away as quickly. You can't ghost someone as quickly. There aren't those easy escapes, but it's obviously really, really important. We are embodied creatures, and to be able to bring our bodies to interactions is part of being fully kind of alive. And we have lost the knack, many of us.
What can we do about this loneliness epidemic that we're experiencing? What's the solution?
I mean, the solution is to be an entrepreneur. And maybe some entrepreneurs are sitting around going, what should our ideas be? Well, one of the ideas is there's a loneliness epidemic. People are lonely. Despite all our gadgets, we still somehow don't quite know, the last mile between humans is not so sorted out. It's like we bring people together in cinemas, in bars, etc., in nightclubs. We bring them together. But that final step, how do you get people talking, is really difficult. And so at the School of Life that I help to run, what we do is we often do conversation evenings where we could bring strangers into a room, we give them a pack of cards with a set of questions, and we get people to ask each other questions. Very simple, so simple in format, but it changes the dynamic. I think people are immensely curious about others and want to reach out and want to make friends, but they just don't know they have permission. So creating, as it were, almost drawing a line in the sand, going, look, if you're within this circle, everyone here is safe. Everyone here is someone you could approach. That changes the dynamic between people totally. I mean, the difference between being on the tube in London, let's say, and being on an isolated mountain path. On a mountain path, people go, hello, when they pass each other, because the rules mandate that you should say hello, that you can say hello. On the tube, you'd be considered weird, so people don't do it. So it's all about playing with the rules. If you have a threshold, a divide between one room and another, and you say once you cross the threshold, here you can speak to strangers. Well, people will, and they won't be embarrassed at all. But it's very hard for an individual to do that, and it's very easy for a system, for a society, a village to do that. In other words, if somebody else changes the frame, that's really helpful for us all.
Mm-hmm. So creating those environments.
Creating environments where certain conversations can have, which people are dying to have. They just don't know that they have permission to have.
I love that. Thinking about giving people permission.
Give people permission. Also, you as a host. I mean, some of us are hosts. We invite people around for tea, for supper, etc. Next time you do that, we often get stuck in very superficial conversations. We don't know how to reach the marrow of our lives. We invite people we like to our homes, but we don't know how to turn that lovely acquaintance into something deeper. And there are rules, there are principles which you can learn. Like, for example, unless you are going to reveal something personal about yourself, you cannot expect somebody else to do the same. So if you're aching for some kind of confession, you can't get that until the other person has heard from you that there is something that you want to confess. So it's a kind of mutuality that's often missed. Everybody sits there and talks about the weather. No one knows that's not a good idea.
So you have to start and be vulnerable and take that risk.
It can
And
help. It can help, obviously, with some caveats. But yes, absolutely. And use social occasions, use your power to convene. All of us can gather people in our homes and do this. It doesn't need to be huge or it doesn't need to be fancy. It's just an attempt to help people to find their way to the more sincere bits of themselves.
Absolutely. What about those people who feel like they can never fit in groups or with other people? They feel different or like they can never belong. Why is that?
They're just more in touch with the reality. No one fits in perfectly. Everyone, to be a human being is to be fundamentally lonely in many ways and to feel like an outsider. So those of us who feel like outsiders just know ourselves a bit better. I mean, I think everybody feels like an outsider. Do you feel like an outsider?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sure, everybody does. Everybody listening. If anybody here doesn't feel like an outsider, please leave a message in the comments, right? And say, I'm totally in line with my sense of what is normal for my age group, my society, etc. I don't think we're going to have many takers on this question. I mean, let's see what happens. But my guess is that people find, most of the time, they find that they are in a minority. And that's because you know yourself from the inside and other people only from what they choose to tell you. And because of the aforementioned sort of frozen nature of social life, very often people are not going to tell us what's really going on. And so leaving us to feel like outsiders unfairly.
That's such an interesting take on it. I've never heard it before.
It's an epidemic of loneliness created by a sense that we should be like everyone else, but we're operating with a wrong notion of what everyone else is like.
That's really interesting. Do attachment styles also manifest in friendships as well? So not only in romantic relationships, but for example, let's say settling for friends that maybe you don't resonate with just because you're scared of abandonment or rejection.
Right. Look, I mean, I'm sure your full emotional mechanism is at play during this thing we call friendships. I'd say the temperature is generally much lower. There's much less at stake. You know, if a friend drops you, etc., it's not existentially risky. That said, of course, people manifest in friendships all sorts of things. So, the person who can never really tell their friends they're upset because they're so afraid or they think it's be bothering them, etc. That person in relationships shows up as someone who can't say anything, might be resentful, might be go off sex if they haven't shared the true cause of what's going on, etc. So, sure, I'd say that friendships are a less intense version of what goes on inside romantic relationships.
And I think that's true for most people. For me personally, it's the opposite.
What's the opposite?
It's really strange. So in my relationship, I'm very comfortable with communicating whatever is on my mind and expressing myself. Whereas in my friendships, I find that more difficult because I see the relationship as more fragile.
And often it is. I mean, there's something wonderful about being able to go to bed with someone, which is once you've been to bed, you can sort of have the argument and then patch it up. And there's something about that deeper intimacy, which means that there's more capacity for, as therapists put it, repair. To repair, there can be rupture and repair. So I think that's a beautiful thing about intimate relationships. But, for your listeners, I think, look, on the whole, it's worth risking destroying a friendship in the name of important truths. On the whole, you probably won't rupture it. You might fear you rupture it because, many of us come to adult friendships with that deep fear from childhood, which is no one wants to know me. No one wants me on their team. No one wants me in the football team. And we take that fear and we exaggerate it and it becomes really problematic. So I think we should probably allow ourselves to trust that we can be a bit more honest than we've been to date and still hold on to a friend.
And just going back a bit to the topic of love and relationships, I've heard you say that love reveals your true identity. And I was curious what you mean by that.
I mean, what I mean, I had a temperature metaphor a while back saying, friendships are less hot. Love is a hot place. In other words, it's really a testing ground. I mean, it's like, we know from other areas of life that you get to see the real person. Let's imagine you're going out in a small boat on a choppy sea. You'll get to meet the real person that you're with. The other person across the boat will kind of reveal their true essence in a situation of kind of danger. And I think some of the same holds true in romantic relationships, that romantic relationships are dangerous, very intense, there's a lot at stake. And so quite quickly, the real self emerges. And sometimes it's beautiful and sometimes it's really nightmarish. And, when it's nightmarish, people often walk away and they generalize and they say, men are crazy, women are awful. You hear this a lot in the dating world. And my answer to that is probably to say, both genders are awful. Both genders are crazy. It's just you don't date both genders, so you don't know. You've hallucinated that one gender is pure. Well, they're not. They're just everybody's slightly nutty and needs to work on themselves. Mm-hmm. That's why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're helping people.
And how do you know, when you're dating, how do you know you've chosen the right person? It's
really simple. The answer will become clear between 30 and 40 years from that moment. It'll become really, really clear, by which time you'll have bought a house, had some children, and you'll be, verging on dying. So the answer does come, and just be patient. 30 to 40 years, you'll get to know. I mean, look, how long has it taken you to know yourself? Not that long. It does take a long, long time. So it takes a long time to get to know yourself, and it takes even longer to get to know somebody else. And that's why a lot of relationships, by definition, are leaps of faith. You tie yourself together with somebody, you leap off the cliff, and you hope your parachute opens, or you have a good parachute, or whatever. There's a soft landing. And so no wonder many of us get it very, very wrong. And we need humor. I'm trying to make a joke here because it's really dark. It's really dark. And some very good people who are very able mothers and fathers and colleagues and friends and maybe gardeners and cooks and all sorts of things. When it comes to this area of life, boy, oh boy, do they have trouble. And so any listeners, you're not alone. It's very, very, very difficult. Luck plays a role. I don't think that everybody who's in a good relationship has earned that place through assiduous, work at the School of Life or another kind of emotional education outfit. I think sometimes it's just they've fallen on a good person. We talk a lot about in dating, like, where are the good people? And it's almost like we always look to these apps, etc., to recruit good people. The truth is, there's a shortage. There's a shortage of love-worthy people. And we talk endlessly about finding the right person. We don't really talk about making more right people. And, this doesn't apply to engineers or pilots. When society realizes it doesn't have enough engineers or pilots, what does it do? It sets up universities, it sets up schools, it sets up training programs, and then it will get the engineers it needs and get the pilots it needs. It can't just wait around for the nice person who just happens to know how to fly. And yet we happen to always wait around looking for people who will know how to make a relationship work. And of course, these people don't exist, or they exist in tiny numbers, absolutely tiny numbers, about as high a number as, well-trained engineers exist in a country without any training, for engineers. So there's a paradox there. And if I was the ruler of the world, do people say that on this podcast? If I was the ruler of the world, then I think it would be helpful to send people not just to learn physics and geography and maths, etc., but also to help them to learn how to, handle their emotions, communicate properly, identify, things they've not done and not protest when someone points it out, etc., etc. All the skills of emotional education, all the skills of emotional maturity should be part of an educational package.
I second that.
If we send people to school to become doctors, why wouldn't we send them to school to become good people?
Yeah,
and worthy lovers. It can be learned. It can be learned. It can be taught.
So what does a worthy lover look like then? Someone who's love-worthy, as you said.
Love-worthy. I mean, they're not self-righteous. They're not defensive. When you talk to them about something that they might have done, they don't go, that's ridiculous, or I give up, and storm out. No, they stay curious. They're able to go, okay, I hear it. I get it. I get that you're, whatever. That's very love-worthy. They forgive. They know they're not perfect, so they forgive other people. That's very love-worthy. The list could go on. So many things, right?
And then is love enough in a relationship?
There are some practical things. Jane Austen, the great 18th century English novelist, knew a lot about this. Her novels are all about trying to see that you don't just need love, you also need money, which is why she mentions money endlessly. All her characters are introduced by how much they earn a year, have access to a year. Very odd. I mean, nowadays, we never mention it. Why do we never mention it? We don't think it's relevant to someone's capacity to form relationships. She's really interested in relationships. And in her novels, generally two things happen. People have no money at all, and then love's difficult. If you have no money, if you can't have a roof over your head, tricky. At the same time, there are characters in all her novels who love money too much. And in the process of loving money too much, they downgrade the true role of love. And so her message to us is, love isn't enough. And that's an anti-romantic message. But I think maybe it is romantic. If you define romantic as helpful to the flowering of love, it is properly romantic. And I think sometimes we ignore these things at our peril. If somebody lives on the other side of the world, they may be wonderful. They're not that available. You're unlikely to be able to have a really good relationship with them if they live, 15 time zones away. If somebody is, as I say, never has any time to be with you because they've got a hobby or a job which doesn't leave them any time, that's not a great precondition for love. We should name these things properly. They're preconditions to do all sorts of great things. And love is a great thing. And so we can be frank with one another about what those things might be.
Mm-hmm. So if someone is in a relationship and they don't know whether they should stay or they should go, is there a way for them to determine that?
Not an easy way. Here's one bit of slightly paradoxical advice. When a choice is very, very difficult, when you agonize, you think, maybe this one, maybe that one, we sometimes think that one of those two choices is fantastic and one of those two choices is disastrous. And we agonize and we think, well, if I pick that one, it'll be brilliant. If I pick that one, it could be absolutely awful. And part of the reason why we're frozen is that we think there's an enormous difference and that we don't know what the difference is. To calm us down, and genuinely, maybe to help us to live more easily, it can sometimes help to downgrade that sense of the kind of dichotomy between two options, staying or leaving in this case. So someone who thinks, do I stay or do I leave? Really want to go, look, you're going to be a bit unhappy whatever you do. Neither's going to be perfect. So, if you leave, you'll be a bit unhappy in this way. If you stay, you'll be unhappy in this way. So let's just get more focused on the particular kind of unhappiness. And even if, let's say, you leave, you're not leaving finding nirvana. You're leaving to suffer in a slightly different way. And that's fine. So long as you're ready. You're like, you know what? I want to suffer in a new way. Great. Be my guest. Fantastic.
So then how do you know whether a relationship is good or not?
Look, I think if you're asking yourself that question, it's not brilliant.
Mm-hmm. So that tells you a lot.
That tells you a lot, right?
Yeah.
If you're constantly going, I don't know, if this relationship is good.
Mm-hmm. That's quite telling.
It's quite telling, I'd say.
So then why do some people sabotage good relationships?
Well, because happiness is very hard to accept. It's a very strange idea. I mean, surely we want to absorb happiness, but our man Sigmund Freud wrote this famous paper called Beyond the Pleasure Principle. And in this paper, he tries to analyze why it is that people don't, as you would expect, simply follow pleasure. They also have an instinct to follow patterns of suffering. And he observed people who, for example, keep getting into relationships with people who make them suffer, or people take jobs that will lead to failure, or embark on quests that are doomed, etc. And he asked himself, why? And Freud's famous answer is that it is a repetition. It is what he called a repetition compulsion. The compulsion to repeat unhappiness, because it's what we know, it's what we've grown up with, and he had an optimistic take on this. Part of the reason why we try to repeat bad things is to try and give them a different ending. So often what we do is we pick somebody who has a problem that we experienced in childhood, and we meet with it in adulthood, and we try and give it a different ending. So yes, we're going out with an alcoholic and our parents were alcoholics, but this time we hope to give that alcoholism a better go. We hope to try and wean the person off alcohol. We aim to give them, aim to have a kind of dialogue with them we couldn't have as a child, etc., etc. So yes, we repeat, but I don't think we repeat just in order to suffer forever and ever. But to come back to your other question, which is, why is happiness hard to absorb? Think of it like somebody who's been in a prison camp all their life, and they've been denied access to food. Suddenly the prison doors are open and they're invited to a banquet and you can eat anything you like. And there's amazing rich foods and, amazing things. One of the responses you could get is indigestion. Sometimes you might even keel over and die because the food is it's too rich. The nutrients cannot be absorbed. And I think that's a metaphor also for emotional nutrients. Sometimes if someone is incredibly sweet to us and generous and thoughtful and is always there for us, we think, what's wrong with you? And really what we're saying is, I don't understand this. This doesn't fit my model of what a human can be like. And we may reject something not because we don't want it, but because it's just unfamiliar. It's freakish in its oddity.
Can you increase your tolerance to happiness?
Sure, absolutely. One of the things to do is to admit that you have this problem. To say to your partner, for example, if you're with a very nice partner, it's so nice that you're nice to me, but sometimes I find it a bit hard to accept. It's tricky. It's weird. Can you sometimes give me love with a teaspoon rather than a label? No, a ladle is the word I'm looking for. So we might say to a friend of ours, can you give me love with a teaspoon, not a giant soup spoon?
And I've heard a lot of people say this, they cannot be sexually attracted to someone unless they reject them a little bit or are a little bit avoidant or a little bit cold, which probably reminds them of their childhood.
Well, I mean, thinking of childhood, of course, Freud, through his famous story of the Oedipus complex, little children, let's look at this squarely, often fancy their parents. I don't mean sexually, but there's a sort of attraction and a kind of pre-sexual attraction. Little boys classically often look at their mothers and want to marry their mothers. And if you've had kids, listen to kids, they actually come out with this stuff. They'll look at daddy, little girls look at their daddies and go, Daddy, can mummy go away so we can get married? They'll just come out with it. Responsible parents, good parents, will very lovingly say, I'm so sorry, no, it's not possible, and shut the bedroom door, as it were. And so a lot, or a fundamental experience in all childhood, is of being outside the bedroom door of a couple that you actually want to go and seize one of the members. And so being excluded, not having what you want, is kind of, in a way, paradoxically very close to what we want. It's perverse. It's genuinely perverse, and we need to navigate around it. And hopefully, our loved ones can give us enough of a flavor of rejecting us without actually rejecting us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sexuality in general is a really interesting and complex subject.
No way.
And not many people talk about it.
Well, they do, but it always needs another conversation, I think. Yeah, there's always more to say, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think a problem that a lot of people have is, especially women, I hear them saying this all the time, they can be very sexually attracted to a stranger, for instance. But once they get in a loving or committed relationship, their sexuality kind of dies down. And might be because, I've heard someone say this, their inner child comes up and sex just feels wrong. Or, I don't know, they can't have sex with the person they love.
Look, I think very often resentments come in, secret resentments. Often the person we don't want to have sex with is someone we're angry with. And we're angry for reasons we can't quite understand. So it's like, we don't want someone touching us. And if someone goes, well, why? They go, why? If you really scratch below the surface, it might be that, you refused to meet their aunt when they were in town last week. And you were really hurt, but you didn't really say very much at the time. But you're kind of still angry with them about that thing. And very often you can't say, because sometimes you don't even know, I don't want to have sex with you because I'm furious about your aunt, that you didn't want to meet. This sounds too strange, but it is that. So I would say often a lack of desire is a curdled resentment that's getting in the way. Often certain sorts of conversation have not happened. If you think of the opposite, why do we want to go to bed with people? We want to go to bed with people because we understand new bits of themselves. We understand, areas of tenderness, and we understand why they are the way they are, etc. Understanding is sexy, sexier than a scented candle often. So working through resentments, reminding yourself of, who the person really is, discovering new parts of them that you didn't know before. These are all erotic pursuits, if you like, but we don't give them enough time. We think being turned on is almost a physiological reaction. It can be sometimes, don't get me wrong, but most of the time I would say it's a psychological response to a good relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all the women watching this would agree that they need to feel psychologically turned on. Like, even if physically your partner is doing the right thing or whatever, if psychologically you're not there, or you're not feeling safe, or you're feeling there's these breaks, pushing the brake,
And let's also, remember the role of what get called kinks and taboo fantasies and desires. Some of the reason that sex dies is that people can't find a way of discussing or sharing with their partners bits of their sexuality that feel outside the norm. And a lot of sexuality is always, almost by definition, about breaking through taboos. And there's a kind of relationship between sexuality and transgression that's very delicate and, at the level of fantasy. Sometimes people are so worried about their own transgressive tendencies that they don't have an imagination. We often talk about sexual liberation. It's a long journey. It didn't just happen in 1965. It didn't just happen when the pill was invented. It didn't happen with the Beatles' first LP. There are lots and lots of ways in which sexual liberation is an ongoing process. We're not there yet. Most people still have compromised or even sometimes unhappy sex lives. But by the way, there are very, sometimes structural reasons in, you can't erase them with a magic wand. But we're still learning, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, yes, we are making progress, absolutely. But then if you look at the stats in Gen Z, for instance, they're having less sex, they're more inhibited sexually, whereas millennials or the generation before them were more like open and like curious about exploration. So I think that's an interesting trend.
It's an interesting trend. I mean, where do we look? We're not living in very sexy times. We're living in a very fragile world where connecting feels dangerous, where governments feel dangerous, where relationships between human beings feel pretty dangerous. It's not the best conditions in which, to want to be intimate with people. So, I think younger generation is going through all sorts of geopolitical and financial, sociological crises that perhaps, don't foster the kind of comfortable conditions in which intimacy can flourish.
Which is that safety and
Safety.
The ability to explore is so much related to
sometimes people go, I like dangerous scenarios. Safety is really the turn on. When you're feeling safe, you can fantasize about all sorts of things, but you need that sense of safety.
Absolutely. This is a fascinating topic. I think we need to have more discussions about this. And for people who, the relationship didn't work out for whatever reason, and are going through a breakup, what is a good way for them to navigate a breakup?
Look, heartbreak and breakups are always going to have a certain amount of pain, but what we have to be aware of is there are greater and lesser degrees of pain. So we really have to keep that in mind. There are better and worse ways of doing this. If you're splitting apart, there are ways in which you'll be crying for a year or two or three or four, and there are ways in which you won't necessarily feeling great for a few months, but it'll be okay. Your integrity won't have been, totally pulverized, etc. And I think that what people need, first and foremost, is explanation. Why are we doing this? Why is this happening? We can't be together. But why? And I think that the worst thing is when people get suspicious that the real reason is because you're an awful person. You are a wretch. You're the worst person in the world. Very few people leave their partners thinking that. They just think, it just didn't work because of this thing. They got a slightly annoying habit, or I've got a slightly annoying habit, or this didn't work, etc., etc. The more you're able to discuss it, the better it is. And conversation and dialogue. And I think it's a tragedy when people ghost each other, walk out on each other out of a fear of hurting each other or a dread of having a sort of brave conversation, and they make it so much worse. So for anyone who's listening and is breaking up with someone, always do the other person, the honor of taking them deep into your decision making. You might think your reasons are awful. They're actually unlikely to be awful. It's just at some deep level, something's not clicking. And that's okay. That's okay. You're not a bad person, and they're not a bad person. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are doing them a favor, because otherwise
Absolutely.
they'll be in that loop of like, why? Why did it happen? I must be awful. And if you give
Absolutely.
them that closure, that,
Exactly.
it can help them
Exactly.
a lot.
Because we know that closure is something that people seek. And, there's a lot of advice on Instagram, etc. The other person won't give you closure. You don't need closure. Find closure yourself. That's kind of tough. We really actually do need closure. And it really helps if the other person gives us closure. So if I was king of the world, running the government, you can exit any relationship, but only if you give them closure. By which we mean really, 3, 4, 5, 6 meet, as long as it takes for a person to go, I get it. I get it. I get that you don't hate me.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Alan, thank you so much. This whole podcast has
Thank you.
been amazing and super insightful. Thank you for your time.